Dunckley. She's a board-certified integrative child psychiatrist and author of Reset Your Child's Brain. She's going to discuss how screen time can affect mood, cognition, sleep, and behavior in children. She's got a wonderful blog that I know if you have your programs, a lot of this information is in there, but it's a great blog. It's a lot of wonderful information. And I have to say, I read her book and I highly recommend it. It's a great read. Her electronic fast, she's right with you. When you read through it, you're like, wow, it's like having your counselor or psychiatrist right with you. When the child answers a question, you say, wow, this is how you answer their response in a very nice, measured manner. So I really appreciate, and we're thrilled to have Dr. Dunckley here to speak today. She's from Los Angeles. And so here's Dr. Dunckley.
I'm Dr. Victoria Dunckley. I'm a child psychiatrist, and I am an integrative practitioner, so that means, as you may know, integrative practitioners look at all aspects of a patient, including lifestyle factors like diet, exercise. We also look at things like micronutrient status, hormone levels, things like that. But I have found that by far and away the most effective tool that I use is addressing electronics use. It's the most efficient and effective treatment intervention that I use. So just to give you a little bit of background, so I started becoming interested in this area when I first completed my child psychiatry training around the turn of the millennium. And at the time, I was working with kids in foster care, group homes, residential treatment centers, and I found those kids were very, very sensitive to gaming. So one of the places I worked at was a residential treatment center, and there was different cottages on site that the kids lived in, and so we had complete control over their environment. And it was very obvious that the kids would act out and become aggressive and assault each other and stuff after they were given, rewarded with video games. So one of the houses agreed to remove the game system completely, and we were able to actually track their incident reports, and they dropped by a third. So, and those kids, this was the highest level of care in the state. So, that's a pretty dramatic drop. So, following that, I started using the intervention with patients in my private practice, and I started realizing that whether the person had bipolar disorder or ADHD or tics or an anxiety disorder, that all the patients seemed to get better, and the stricter we were with electronics, the more pronounced the benefits were and the more sustained they were. So I just want to point out that I'm going to be addressing screen time itself, not just the EMF piece, but actually the physiological effects of screen time from the screen and interacting with the screen. Okay, so I just want to go over a few of the trends that are going on right now with children. There's some disturbing things that are going on. It's okay, it's supposed to be blank. So that you listen to me and not look at the screen. So psychiatric disorders are on the rise, or at least diagnosis of them. So more children are being diagnosed with bipolar disorder. There's like something like crazy, like a 40,000% increase in diagnosis of childhood bipolar disorder. ADHD, tics and Tourette syndrome, stuttering are all on the rise, and of course we've all heard about how autism has just exploded. At the same time, there's an increase in the prescribing of psychotropic medications for children, particularly the stimulants, which are used for attention problems and impulse control issues, and the antipsychotics, which are medications that are highly effective for a variety of things, but they're really potent drugs and they have a lot of side effects. So those drugs have side effects actually in the majority of children, and they can cause serious medical issues that are difficult to reverse, and sometimes they're totally irreversible. So that's particularly concerning. So also we're seeing more obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure. These are conditions that we never saw before in children. We typically saw them in middle-aged adults. At the same time, there's also an increase in disability filings for children for neuropsychiatric disorders, And there's also been an increase in the gender achievement gap. So both boys and girls are having more difficulty with reading, but boys are falling off the curve twice as fast as girls. So there's a lot of issues going on that are concerning. Okay. So meanwhile, it's no surprise to anybody that we are seeing a huge increase in children's daily use of screen time. The average child is logging in 5 to 7 hours a day. Kids are using more and more devices and more places, like in the car, before school, after school, and also using them at younger and younger ages. So there's now devices for toddlers and even babies, and then in addition to that, we've seen a huge, rapidly escalating use of screens in school. So both in the classroom and for homework. So that it was the one place that was protected during the day, and now that's being invaded as well. So the question is, if we're looking at all these disturbing trends, and then we're also looking at the increase in screen time, the question is, are these two things related? And the fact is that there's a ton of research already out there linking screen time with obesity, with psychiatric disorders, with aggression, criminal behavior, addiction, both tech addiction and other addictions, and also learning disorders, speech delays, sensory integration issues, all sorts of things. So we already know that all of this is connected. So the question becomes, if we know this already, why aren't we being more conservative about it, and why the heck are we introducing it into school? So the reason is because, as people have already been mentioning, there's a lot of myths and misconceptions that are perpetuated, and there's various financial and political reasons that are complicated and powerful, but I just want to go over a few of the myths that are perpetuated. So the first is that people think that as long as screen time is educational, that it's not harmful and that it might be even beneficial. But the fact is that total screen time is a much better predictor of whether it causes harm or not. And it's a better predictor than the type of screen time or what the child's actually doing. The second myth is that interactive screen time is better than passive. But in fact, interactive screen time is actually more likely to cause, because it's more stimulating, it's more likely to cause problems with sleep, with behavior, with emotional dysregulation, and it's more addicting. And actually, one study showed that only 30 minutes of computer use in the evening caused cognitive issues the next day, and sleep issues the next day, compared to 2 hours of TV use caused some changes in the sleep pattern, but no issues with cognition the following day. So there's studies that are now showing what I see, which is that interactive is more dysregulating than passive. Another myth is that people seem to think that, especially in regards to video games, that everything's okay in moderation, but that's simply not true. I think of screen time as a stimulant, and we don't give caffeine to children. We know that there's just some things that kids' nervous systems aren't meant to handle. So that kind of thinking doesn't always apply, especially to children with vulnerabilities. And then also, I'm just going to go this really quickly. There's the myth that educational technology is going to revolutionize learning, and that has simply not been proven at all. At best, it's neutral, and there's a lot of evidence that it's harming kids. And I'm just going to give a couple examples here. One is that reading from a screen actually hinders literacy development. So it impairs deep reading and reading comprehension, and even for adults as well. We don't make the same kind of links. So deep reading is you reading something and connecting it to things you already know and then applying it to things in the future. So that's actually impaired. And then handwriting, it turns out handwriting is superior, or writing by hand is superior to taking notes on a laptop. And that's true for kids and adults in terms of recall, integrating the material, and exam performance. So basically, it's just important to realize that the nature of screen technology itself is at odds with what kids need for proper development. So they need movement, eye contact, face-to-face conversation, exposure to nature and the outdoors. They need to be in 3D space with varying amounts of stimulation. And they need to be able to express themselves creatively. So all of those things are reduced with screen, especially in the classroom. Okay, so as I said, the way that I kind of view the effects of screens is that it really acts like a stressor. It's a stimulant. So there's various mechanisms that actually induce this stress response. So I'm just going to go over a few of them here. One is that the reward pathways in the brain are activated. So what happens is once these pathways are activated, and if they're overactivated repeatedly in an intense way on a daily basis, they become worn out. So basically the child needs more and more stimulation to stay motivated, to stay focused, and then it becomes a vicious cycle. Intense sensory stimulation also increases arousal. So the bright screen, the vivid colors, the fast movement, all of those things has to be processed by the developing nervous system, and it's not meant to process artificial intense stimulation like that. Then there's the light that's coming from the screen. So, screen light in general tends to be intense and have a lot of blue and white tones. That suppresses melatonin, as and we've already been talking about melatonin a little bit here. But melatonin is the sleep chemical that's released by darkness. And, but in addition to affecting the body clock, it also helps regulate brain chemistry as well as hormones. So it's particularly concerning that it's being suppressed, and there's evidence that it might be affecting kids in terms of their puberty and other hormonal issues. Then we have the media multitasking. So kids, when they're doing homework, they tend to be Skyping and chatting on Facebook and listening to music, and they're texting. And then they're looking, using the internet to look things up. So it's, there's a lot of multitasking going on, and we know that multitasking fractures attention and impairs cognition. And the more that kids multitask, the worse they get at multitasking. So that's another, kind of a vicious cycle. And then, as I already mentioned, the interactivity itself is stimulating. That's why, it's much harder for a kid to put down a device that they're playing with like that, because the interactivity keeps the person going. And the people who are designing, whether it's an app or software or a video game, they're genius at timing things so that it keeps the person engaged. And then lastly, as we've been talking about the EMF effects, there's evidence that it induces stress reactions at the systemic level, like the hormonal level, as well as at the level of the cell. So there's all these different things that are creating this hyperarousal reaction, and they're probably all synergistic. Okay, so if we have all these stress reactions, how do these actually, in the body, how do these turn into symptoms? Well, when you have a lot of overstimulation of the nervous system and stress reactions, the blood flow actually starts to shift from the front part of the brain to the more primitive part of the brain. So the front part of the brain, the frontal lobe, controls mood regulation, executive function, so paying attention, getting things done. It controls impulse control, so being able to stop and think before you do something. Creativity, and then even things like empathy and self-awareness are also all controlled by the frontal lobe. So if you think about if a child's in that fight or flight mode, they're in a survival state, so that's all they're thinking about. You're not supposed to be thinking about someone else's feelings if you're in that mode. So when they start operating from that more primitive area, you can see how a child will get in trouble, because all they're thinking about is, they're just in that fight or flight mode. Okay, so, sorry, put that up there. So, yeah, so we have the overstimulation, the frontal lobe gets affected, and then everything the frontal lobe does becomes impaired. So any or all of these things can happen. So you can see how affecting the frontal lobe can manifest in all these different ways depending on the child's composition and their own characteristics. So I call this electronic screen syndrome because I'm simply describing the effects of the electronics as opposed to differentiating it from an actual underlying disorder. So when a child's overstimulated, what does it look like? Okay, so everyone's going to understand, everyone's going to be able to relate to this picture, which is that the child's just dysregulated. They're not able to modulate their level of arousal or their mood. So they get stressed out, they can't calm down. So they're typically really irritable. They cry easily. They're having meltdowns, tantrums over really minor things. They tend to have problems focusing. So a lot of these kids will have problems in school. They struggle getting their homework done. If they do their homework, they forget to turn it in. So, and some kids are even, I see some kids who are even somewhat paranoid or even hallucinating, and it goes away when we remove the electronics. Behaviorally, because they're feeling kind of out of control inside, they tend to try to control everything around them. So they are defiant and oppositional. And then, as I mentioned, they have low empathy because they're not able to put themselves in someone else's shoes. Okay, so, and then this slide is just kind of going over what I was just talking about, how really electronics can mimic or exacerbate virtually any psychiatric and even neurological disorders. So with mood, we see, I've seen a lot of kids who are misdiagnosed as bipolar disorder, and they look exactly like they have bipolar disorder. They're raging, they can't think, they might even be aggressive, they can't sleep. And then we remove the electronics, and it's dramatic. It's like a completely new child. Also, I want to point out that there seems to be a specific risk for light at night and depression, and even suicidality, including completed suicides. There's a very specific, pretty strong link. So that's obviously concerning when we're using computers, when kids have to use computers to turn their homework in. Cognitively, I mentioned that the ADHD and also learning disorders. So I've seen a lot of kids who are struggling with reading or struggling with math, and they're just completely stuck. They're getting tutoring, they're not getting better. We remove the electronics, all of a sudden they take off. And like some of the other ones, doctors have mentioned here, I've seen kids go up an entire grade level in a matter of a month or two. So it can be quite dramatic. Behavior, I already mentioned. Also anxiety, I've seen some kids who develop very severe cases of either generalized anxiety or OCD, like obsessive compulsive disorder, particularly with the Wii video game. For some reason, I've seen some really severe cases. And again, it resolves when we remove the electronics. And then neurologically, autism gets worse. Again, when we removed electronics, I've seen some kids who are autistic start speaking. I've seen them, go from being raging and assaulting to calm and start to make progress, make more eye contact. Sensory issues do not get better unless you remove electronics. A lot of kids these days have sensory issues. It's really common now, and that's kind of an underdiagnosed issue that responds well to getting rid of electronics. So if we think about kind of the consequences of what's going on here, we have children are getting medicated unnecessarily. They're receiving treatment for mental health and for through the schools that's inefficient, or sometimes it's not working at all. So it's actually a misuse of resources. So in contrast, when we reset the brain with an electronic fast, we can reverse all these things. So the first thing I do is I do at least a 3-week minimum strict electronic fast, so no interactive screen time, no gaming, no internet use, no smartphones, no iPads, no emailing, texting. And this helps resynchronize the body clock. Then the child is allowed to get deep rest for several weeks. the stress hormones lower, their brain chemistry levels out again. So what we see is across the board, we see an improvement of mood, cognition, and behavior, regardless of the child's diagnosis. So it doesn't always improve everything, but it virtually always, if you do it right, it improves their symptoms in all these different realms. So it really is a big quality of life changer. At the same time, it clarifies diagnosis. So, I see a lot of kids who've been misdiagnosed. So to me, this is a no-brainer. You just do this first to figure out what's going on. And then again, to minimize the need for medication. The other benefit of doing this, though, is that, like I was saying, like some kids just can't tolerate screen time at all. So kids seem to have a different tipping point of screen time tolerability. Like children with autism may not be able to tolerate any at all. Other kids might be able to tolerate a little bit on the weekends. So if you reset them, then you can start really low, start low, go slow. Just start with 15 minutes on the weekend and see if they can tolerate it. If their symptoms return, then you back off again. So this really, when people are always asked, well, how much is too much? Well, it's really individual. You really have to do this first, and then you can tell in a much more methodical way. So I'm just going to go over a couple cases really quickly. The first is Sophia. She was a 15-year-old girl with autism and ADHD. She was on 2 medications. One was for ADHD. The other one was as needed for when she became really agitated. And she came in earlier this year, and she had gained 12 pounds in a matter of months. She was agitated. She was shrieking. She was hitting her mom, crying, and I hadn't seen her like that since I had first seen her like 2 years before that. And so as I was talking to the mom, trying to figure out what was going on, the mother handed Sophia her smartphone. And I asked the mom how long she'd been doing that, because this was a family who really didn't use electronics. And the mother said, oh, well, the mother said, well, she started an iPad program at school, so I thought it was okay to give it to her. So then, we knew that there was not just one, but 2 sources of screen time now. So the first thing we did was, we stopped, the mom stopped giving her the smartphone, and she got about 50% better. So then we had to work with the school to get rid of the iPad use. Now, as you can imagine, some schools are more open than other schools, but I have found that if you keep at it and you keep talking to the school about the potential benefit and try to present it as a win-win situation, or as a trial basis, that the schools are, can be accommodating. So anyway, once we did that, she, returned to her baseline, and we did get the weight off of her as well. But it turned out that she was gaining the weight because she was getting more medication. So also, I just want to point out that this was, everything I had talked about with his mother was through a translator. So you can see how easy it is to miss something like this. So this is Ryan. He's an 8-year-old boy. He was 8 years old at the time. Good student, no mental health history. This was the child of a colleague of mine. So Ryan was in 2nd grade. He suddenly started to lose interest in school. He stopped playing with his friends. He was just spending time in his room, playing games on his smartphone. So the mother took him to all these different doctors at UCLA, USC. First he was diagnosed with depression, then ADHD, and then autism. He was put on, I think, 3 different medications. Nothing was working. The mother came to me and said, what should I do? He's on all these meds. I just want to take him off everything. And I said, well, before you do anything else, just try the electronic test first and see what happens. So within 4 weeks, he was playing with his friends again. He started learning in school again. His grades started to go up. The teachers asked what she did. And the mother said, I just took him off of his smartphone. That was it. And then within 6 months, she had weaned him off all his medication. That was 2 years ago. And so since then, he's been doing fine. He's got, he's doing well in school. He's got friends. So this is a child that went from being high functioning and very healthy to looking quite ill. And not all cases are going to resolve this nicely, but like I said, I think virtually all cases will improve remarkably if you do it right. So just really quickly, so basically the recommendations are, technology is not going anywhere, but we need to pace it, introduce it in a way that's appropriate to developmental and also individual needs. Also, ironically, protecting the frontal lobe will help children, protecting the frontal lobe by restricting electronics will help the child be able to use electronics in a way that's healthy and productive as an adult. Because the frontal lobe predicts success in all areas of life, whether it's school, work, or relationships. So without a healthy frontal lobe, it doesn't matter how smart you are, how tech savvy you are, you're not going to go anywhere. We also need to use FAST when we aren't sure what's going on, when the child's dysregulated, to help reset everything. Using wired-only access not only reduces EMFs, it also dramatically reduces accessibility, both for the child and for the parent. So that helps them spend more time together, in a healthy way. And then lastly, in school, kids need to be able to do FAST. They need to be able to opt out of the iPad and laptop programs. And some kids may need no screens at all. Some kids may need no Wi-Fi exposure. And some kids may need no computer-based homework or no light at night. So we need to be able to have specific accommodations for kids, whether they have special needs or not. Parents should be able to opt out. I feel like this is really a human rights issue. So on my website, Reset Your Child's Brain, there's some resources there now, but I want to keep adding more resources to help parents request accommodations at school specifically, because that's really kind of the heart of the matter now. And then, I don't know if you guys can read that, but... so the point here is that the easiest way to change a lifestyle issue is really to change the environment, and that really means getting rid of, getting rid of devices, removing them from the home, and reducing accessibility. So that's it. Thanks for your attention. Appreciate it.